Ireland is a European success story. Its economy did so well in the 1990s, it became known as the Celtic Tiger. Its reputation attracted waves of new immigrants, transforming the capital, Dublin, into a hub of multiculturalism. The problem is that not everyone is happy with it. A recent cost of living crisis has pushed the immigration issue to the front of people's minds. And with EU and local elections taking place, there are calls for change at the ballot box. I've come to Ireland to meet Leo Varadkar, the country's former Prime Minister, or Taoiseach as they say here. Leo, do you mind me asking, how's Colm doing?
He's doing well. He was actually the council last time.
He shocked the nation when he announced his resignation in March. Yet he's back on the campaign trail already for a local Dublin candidate.
Shall we call and say hello there?
Next, I'll sit down with Leo Varadkar and ask him about immigration, the challenges facing the economy, and about Ireland's decision to formally recognise Palestine. Do you feel freer now that you're no longer the Taoiseach?
Yeah, I think so. When you're the Prime Minister of your country, when you're the leader of your party, you have certain responsibilities to the country, to the people, and also to the government, to the coalition you're trying to keep together, to the party that you're trying to keep behind you. When you're a former Prime Minister, and I'm still a Member of Parliament, you can be more able to speak more freely with fewer consequences.
When you look back, do you look back with much regret or with pride?
I really feel a sense that I was privileged in many ways to be in Parliament for almost 20 years. Spent most of them around the cabinet table as a member of government, and most of those as leader of my party and head of government or deputy head of government. So many very good people get elected to the Irish Parliament. Few get a chance to serve and make a difference to the extent that I did, and I'm very, very grateful for that. But these things should never be forever.
But those two stints as Prime Minister, particularly 2 years and 2 years, right? Sort of split up. If I had to ask you, what do you think was your biggest success? You would say what?
I suppose there'd be two or three. It's probably for other people to judge my successes rather than me, but the things that people would say to me would be certainly dealing with Brexit. I came to office the first time just after the decision by the UK to leave the European Union. There was a real concern that it might result in a hard border between North and South, that it might undermine Ireland's position in the European Union, that it might undermine the peace in Northern Ireland. And we worked very hard for a number of years to make sure that none of those things happened. And that involved negotiating 3 different agreements with 3 different Prime Ministers, but managed to do that. Was there for the pandemic, for the first phase of the pandemic, leading Ireland through a very difficult time for the world. And by any international analysis, the number of excess deaths in Ireland was very low and our economy bounced back very quickly. Then there were efforts I made to make the country a more modern place, around bringing us into the European mainstream in terms of rights for minorities, for women, for workers. And then little things. One of the things I promised to do when I first became Prime Minister back in 2017 was to double funding for the arts and sport, and just managed to get that over the line before I resigned. But they'd be the main things. But the ones that people would say to me would be Brexit and the pandemic period in particular.
Did you find that you needed to be tougher than normal? Did you have to kind of act out of character a little bit when you were negotiating Brexit?
I don't think I ever acted out of character. I did the experience of dealing with 3 very different British Prime Ministers, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, and latterly with the final agreement with Rishi Sunak. But I think so long as your objectives are clear and so long as you know what you want to achieve and that it's achievable, you can do that. And we were very lucky to receive enormous solidarity from other EU countries, which was not guaranteed at the start, and also the watchful eye of the United States, and certainly having a president in the White House who was interested and concerned about Ireland is always helpful.
Did the UK underestimate the Irish during Brexit?
I think they didn't properly take account of Ireland when Brexit was conceived. You know, when you look back over the debates around Brexit, you see, you know, talk about immigration, you see talk about controlling money and laws and borders. I don't think it was ever properly considered how it might impact on Northern Ireland. And of course, Northern Ireland voted against Brexit and voted to stay in the European Union. And that really didn't feature in the debate. So I think they weren't prepared for that when it happened. I do think they underestimated the solidarity of the European Union. I think they certainly thought that they would be able to go to certain European capitals, that those countries would give them a better ear than they actually did. And I think they underestimated European solidarity in that sense.
And when we talk of all the downstream effects, when we look at their immigration policy right now, the Rwanda policy, that might change based on their general election coming up. But their seemingly creative and maybe even obscure solutions to migration with Rwanda, the knock-on effects of the fact that that is linked to Ireland's migration situation. Are we still seeing the negative repercussions of Brexit?
A very smart colleague said to me, I think it was in the few weeks after the referendum happened in Britain, and he said to me, people think that Brexit is going to be a storm. It'll be bad, but it'll blow over. And he said, it's not like that at all. It's more like climate change. It's a permanent change in the environment between the UK and Ireland and between the UK and the EU. So the effect is that issues are going to be thrown up all the time, unforeseen consequences of Brexit, and we'll have to manage them as they arrive. So, you know, one thing that was evident is the fact that we've a lot of people have come to Ireland from Ukraine, and they're extremely welcome here. We're glad that we've been able to provide them a refuge when they needed it. But because Britain required visas, I think a good proportion of those who came to Ireland, English-speaking country, would have otherwise gone to the UK. Right. And then, of course, we see some knock-on effects from the Rwanda policy. So there will be so many unforeseen consequences of Brexit that we will have to fix and patch up as we go along. And of course, that's why the European Union was invented in the first place, because of the idea that if we all have different rules, different laws, it's going to be messy, and it is messy.
So one of their slogans is "Stop the boats." I know as a kind of centre-right or centrist politician, it's not the easiest position to come up with catchy slogans. It's usually those on the fringes who can give you those like bangers, right? Over here, it's Ireland is full. To what do you attribute that sentiment here, and why it resonates with so many people?
Well, yeah, I think there was some very interesting research done the last couple of weeks around Irish public opinion. What it showed is that a clear majority of Irish people believe that migration has been a good thing for Ireland, for our economy, for our public services, modernising our society, making it more diverse. But also majority people feel that the numbers arriving the last couple of years have been greater than we can manage. And I think that's probably a reasonable view, that migration is a good thing on balance. But the numbers have been so great in the last couple of years that has put pressure on our services and our housing system. And you know, I don't think that's a racist or anti-migrant view. There are people who have very right-wing views or very sometimes racist views about migration, but that's a different thing to people saying that the numbers just in the last couple of years have been very high, and we've struggled to cope with that. What I think some people believe is that was a design, that there was a government decision to do that, but of course it wasn't. It was heavily influenced by the war in Ukraine, which was a decision made in the Kremlin, not in Dublin, and heavily influenced by the push factors that are causing huge numbers of people to enter Europe from Africa and from Asia. And sometimes in Ireland, being a small country, being an island, we believe that things happen because we decide they do. In fact, we're actually part of a much bigger world, and so much of what we deal with are driven by factors and decisions that are made elsewhere.
It's really hard to disentangle the economy and migration. Issues like the housing crisis, cost of living crisis, homelessness, and migration, because these are, you know, stresses on one end and from the other. For those who criticize you and your government for not doing enough for the economy, not doing enough to end homelessness or reduce it while it rose, for those who criticize you for saying by saying that the cost of living crisis exacerbated all these issues, and migration is sort of the straw that broke the camel's back then when it came to people's anti-migration views. Do you look back and feel that you could have done better?
Yeah, well, first of all, I don't think the camel's back is broken. I think what we're seeing in Ireland is a political debate about migration that is new to Ireland, but isn't new in other parts of the world. They've been having these debates in Germany, in France, in the Netherlands, in Britain for 20 years now. So we've just kind of become a normal European country in that sense. What I always say to people is Ireland's economy would not be as strong as it is were it not for migration. We're a small country, 500,000 people from other parts of the world are here in Ireland paying income tax, working in those tech companies. You go into our public services, you go into our hospitals, you see who's actually building the new houses we need. They're often part of an international labour force. So on balance, certainly legal migration has been a very good thing for the Irish economy. And one of the biggest challenges we face actually are skills gaps. There wouldn't be a restaurant or a shop in Dublin or Cork, our two major cities, that would be able to function without people from other parts of the world. But what I think the public want to know is that we're actually in control of the situation. And that's, I think, particularly where the issue around asylum has become very difficult. Because, of course, you can control the work permits you issue to people to come and work in Ireland. You can control the student visas. You can't actually control the number of, or it's at least very hard to control the number of asylum seekers who arrive. And that's not unique to Ireland. Britain has the boats. All the Mediterranean countries have the boats as well. There's nothing new about boats. And then you have people coming across the central route as well.
Are we having two different discussions sometimes? Because I feel with cities like Dublin or Cork, cosmopolitan, especially Dublin, you've had local Irish people and others assimilating and adapting and interfacing with each other over 10, 15, 20 years, migrants coming in, working, the society getting used to the other coming in. But on the other hand, you have small towns, small cities. I saw a mini documentary on a place called Roscree in the middle of the country. More, ethnically homogenous, that kind of, and then they see refugees coming in and suddenly the entire dynamic and demographic of the town changes. So when we even talk of migration, are we even talking about one thing or are we talking about multiple things?
No, we're talking about multiple things, but I think often that's not fully appreciated. So the vast majority of people who come to Ireland as migrants come legally. They're UK citizens. They're 30,000 Irish people return every year. They're coming from the EU. They have work permits. They're coming here legally. They're working. They're paying tax. They pay their own way. And I think what's causing difficulties for a lot of people are those who are coming either as refugees or asylum seekers who have to be accommodated by the government and then tend to be accommodated all in the one place, whether it's the last hotel in the town, whether it's an old army barracks. And that's, I think, what's causing a real challenge and one that we have to explain to people a bit better. What drives people to risk their lives to cross the Sahara, what drives them to get on small boats to get to Britain, what drives them to risk their lives in the Mediterranean isn't something that somebody decided in an office in Dublin. We live in a world where there are millions of people on the move, driven by war, driven by climate change, driven by poverty, driven by discrimination. A relatively small number of them, about 1 million, enter Europe every year irregularly, and about 1 or 2% of them make their way to Ireland. And the only way we can deal with this challenge is by cooperation. Cooperating with the UK because we have a common travel area, signing up to the EU Migration Pact so we have a similar set of rules and returns, instead of what's happening at the moment is people just being pushed from one country to the other and we're at the end of the road, so we're the ones experiencing it now more so than the past. But we have to deal with those underlying causes that push people not to apply for the work permit or the work visa in the way they might do, but to actually risk their lives and fall into the hands of human traffickers. And that's to do a lot with what's happened in the world. Countries of transit like Libya, countries of origin like Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan. Why are those countries in the state that they are? In many cases because of Western actions, which destabilize those states and cause people to leave.
Responsibility given that you're from the West, to be a part of the solution, especially since Western foreign policy is an underpinning factor?
Well, I don't think Ireland is responsible for the foreign policy of great Western powers, far from it. But I do think that we need to be part of the solution.
For those who would choose the populist option in local elections or the EU elections as those providing the right solutions with those zingers, those great slogans and more clear-cut solutions, your message to them is what?
Populists have no solutions, and they always get found out in the end.
How?
They get into government and their policies fail very often, or other times they get exposed. And I think we might be about to experience a phase of populism in Ireland. I think we'll also get through it. You know, look, for example, at Poland, where they had a populist government for quite some time. The people in Poland, particularly the younger people, had enough of it, and they've come back to the centre. I think we're going to see that happening in the UK with a centre-left government replacing a government that was increasingly right-wing and nationalist. It's what the Conservative Party sadly became in Britain. And we saw, of course, President Trump being elected in America, implementing the Muslim ban, promising to build a wall, none of this having any real effect. And the people voted for President Biden. Now, what happens in November, who knows? Defeating populists once doesn't mean they're defeated forever. But I think it's a battle that we have in our hands and one that we can win.
Tell me your thoughts on what's happening in Gaza right now.
Well, look, I think what's happening in Gaza is truly shocking. When the events of October 7th happened, when Hamas attacked Israel, we were very quick, and I was very quick as Prime Minister at the time, to condemn that without equivocation. And I did fear at that time that Israel's reaction would be disproportionate. And I feared that they would subject Palestinian people to collective punishment. What has happened is worse than my worst fears in terms of the conflict going on for 6 months, the loss of life. It is a tragedy for the Palestinian people who are suffering so much. Most of the people who have been killed are women and children, civilians. Let's never forget that. But it's also a disaster for Israel too, because it's a failure. Hamas has not been defeated. The hostages haven't been released. In fact, many of them are dying, which is terrible. And Israel is losing support all around the world, losing friends, even starting to lose the support of younger people in America. And it's also caused people to be radicalized, people who will become a security threat to Israel into the future. So there's two levels of tragedy. There's what's happening in terms of the human suffering on the ground, and there's the fact that this is actually a disaster for Israel as well as for Palestine. When
you were with Joe Biden, you said, we see our history in their eyes, the Palestinian people. Tell me what you meant by that.
I think every country sees the situation in the Middle East through the prism of its own history. And Ireland is a country that for a long time was denied our national identity. We're a country that had to struggle for independence. We're a country that experienced land being taken from us and experienced mass emigration and also experienced a famine that was as much about policy than it was about food shortages. So I think when Irish people see Palestinians, they can empathise with them in a way that perhaps people in some other Western countries may struggle to. But I also said that we can see Israel in our story as well. You know, this is an ancient country, an ancient nation state that was refounded. Israelis have managed to revive their language, the Hebrew language, in a way that we haven't been as successful when it comes to the Irish language, the Gaelic language. So I think we can see ourselves in the eyes of Israelis and Palestinians, but at the moment, particularly with so much suffering and so much injustice, the Irish people really, their hearts are very much with Palestinian civilians at the moment.
The Israelis were not too happy when the current Taoiseach announced the recognition of a Palestinian state. Why is it so important to recognize Palestine, the idea of a state of Palestine right now?
I think it has symbolic effect. It also has some practical effects too. And we decided to do that with a group of countries. We didn't want to take a unilateral action that would be easily dismissed. So we worked with a number of countries on recognition, and in the end, 2 others came with us, Norway and Spain. And we would hope that it will cause public opinion and political opinion in other countries in the West to put pressure on their governments to do the same. We've already heard President Macron, for example, say that it's no longer taboo that France could recognise Palestine before there's a peace agreement. That would be significant. We see people like Penny Wong, for example, in Australia. Australia is very much a pro-Israeli country traditionally, not ruling it out. So we're a small country. Our influence is limited. We may punch above our weight, but it's still a small weight, given that we're a country of only 5 million people. But I hope it offers some form of leadership and will cause public opinion and political opinion in other countries to pressurise their politicians and their governments to follow suit.
So there's the symbolism, but when you recognize Palestine, what Palestine are you recognizing?
So the Palestine we're recognising is a state that's based on the 1967 borders. They can be changed, but not by annexation or by violence, only by negotiation. And we're essentially saying that we recognise the right of the Palestinian people to have their state, and that is equal to that of the right of the Israeli people to have their state too. So we recognise both states. It shouldn't be mistaken for any recognition or sympathy for Hamas. You know, we recognise Russia. That does not mean that we support Putin. We recognise that there's a country called Afghanistan, which sadly has a Taliban government. So I think it's important not to make the mistake of thinking that by recognising a country, that is somehow an endorsement of the actions of Hamas. You know, the United States recognises Iran. Right. I don't think anyone would accuse them of being supportive of the regime in Tehran.
If you had the opportunity to speak to Netanyahu now and speak to him directly and tell him your thoughts on what to do next, what would you say?
Look, sadly, I don't think he would care very much about my thoughts. I think, as many American commentators now say, that Netanyahu is himself a barrier to peace. And I think he has undermined Israel. He's undermined their democracy. He's undermined the independence of their judiciary. And he's now undermining the security. He failed to keep Israel safe. And now through his actions, in the medium to long term, Israeli security is more at risk. I believe he is one of the worst things ever to happen to Israel. And that's perhaps what I would say to him, but I'm pretty sure what the response would be.
Where do you place Ireland in the world? It seems to be a country that's learning to find its place in the world, cosmopolitan, punching above its weight, as you say. Long term, where would you like to see Ireland vis-a-vis its relationship to the world?
Well, I think above all, Ireland's place is at the heart of Europe. We're founder members of the single market, of the Eurozone. Our heart is very much as part of the European Union. We're also a country that has a special relationship with the United Kingdom. Our nearest neighbours, a shared history, need to work together in Northern Ireland, and also has a long-standing and special relationship with the United States, given that so many Irish people went there and helped to build that country. But we do need to look around the world more. It's pretty clear, I think, to everyone that over the course of the next generations, that global economic, military and political power will shift to the south, to China, to India, to Latin America, in due course Africa. And that's one of the reasons when I was Taoiseach, when I was Prime Minister of Ireland, I set out a global ambition for the country to increase our presence on the ground. So might be hard to believe, but you know, we didn't have an embassy in New Zealand, we didn't have an office in Mumbai, you know, we didn't have you know, bases in places like Vancouver, for example, a lot of Latin America, and we've really tried to deepen those relations, thinking ahead and thinking to the future when the world is going to be a very different and more multipolar place.
That would probably also include a relationship with Russia, but not now.
Look, I wish it could include a relationship with Russia. It can't now. You know, Russia's a country I've been to twice. I'm now banned from there, so I'm not sure I'll ever get to visit again. And I know some really great Russian people. And I think it's a real shame that opportunity that was there to bring Russia into the West, or at least into the democratic world, that didn't happen. I think there were mistakes made in Europe and America. But obviously the main issue that happened in Russia was because of instability there, an authoritarian government took hold again. But we can't lose hope for the possibility that Russia is a country that may once again be in a different path. But given what's happening in Ukraine, the interference in Moldova and Georgia and other countries, relations are very strained.
My final question to you, what are Leo Varadkar's principles?
Commitment to democracy, commitment to liberalism and personal freedom, a commitment to Europe, a belief that the market economy is the best way to create wealth, but not the best way to make sure it's used appropriately or distributed fairly. And that's why you need to have a social market economy behind any of those principles.
A capitalist with a heart.
Yeah, well, look, I always think that assumes the capitalists don't have a heart. I assume everyone has a heart of some sort. But I think actually Bono, the Irish singer and artist, describes it very well. And he says that capitalism is a great way to create wealth, to create resources, but it's ultimately amoral. And that's the role of government.
We need to inject more morality and more compassion. I think so.
And again, the founder of capitalism, Adam Smith, what did he say? He said before wealth can be distributed, it needs to be created, but it should be distributed. And I think sometimes that's something socialists don't understand. When I hear left-wing people in Ireland, around the world, talking about resources, they always talk about how the resources can be divided up differently or more fairly. They don't seem to appreciate that those resources have to be created and recreated every year. And that's the fundamental flaw in that philosophy, I think.
Leo Varadkar, thank you very much for joining us on the interview.
Thank you.